Hi, I'm Mara Webster with In Creative Company, and thank you so much for tuning in to one of our talks today. I'm so excited today to be joined by the fantastic Nikesh Patel, currently starring in the series Starstruck. And I wanted to talk about working with Rose Matafeo because you were actually already a huge fan of her comedy and had gone to some of her shows. So you had such an understanding of her comedic sensibility even before you got this role. And so I wanted to ask you about how knowing her comedy, knowing her styling and the way that she likes to tell a story actually helped you in terms of character development when you were reading the script and understanding who Tom was going to be.
Yeah, I think apart from being a fan of Rose's work, I sort of didn't know what to expect when I first read these scripts, and then as soon as I did read them, I just thought they're really funny and really well observed, and there's something about this situation which is already and slightly fantastical that could kind of spiral off into something that isn't really that relatable or but I just thought with these two characters and in fact all the characters in the show, Rose and Alice Nedden, who co-wrote the show, like really grounded it in stuff that anyone can kind of relate to, whatever their jobs. And I think so when we started talking about the dynamic between these two people and how to play that, a lot of that was already there in the script, and then it was always just finding ways to make sure it was grounded, which sounds like an odd thing to say when you're talking about playing a movie star, but I think that side of it was really important. That there are bits of this, there are obviously elements of being in that world that are kind of larger than life and slightly ridiculous, but then how do we have that but then also hold something that feels like, oh, actually these are just in a way that hopefully is relatable to people wider than showbiz, like, oh, this is just about two people that are trying to connect and keep missing each other.
And the two of you didn't get a chance to do your initial rehearsals and screen tests together in person in the same way. And so going from doing screen tests on Zoom and then doing rehearsals where you still couldn't physically even stand as close to each other, how did you really have to adjust your tools and your way of working to still create that dynamic and that chemistry that then when you were on set, you could then pull it all together in the moment on camera?
I think there was an element of, to be quite honest, yeah, you're right. We first met on Zoom, and then we had a kind of recall, and it was still like we have to be 2 meters apart, and but when it came to we had a rehearsal period before we shot anything, which was really great because it just meant we could figure certain things out and kind of, it sounds unusual, but I think it'll be understandable for a lot of people watching this. There's also just that I was really grateful for that experience of, oh, this is what it's like to stand in a room with someone, that isn't my flatmate who I live with, because there's an adjustment period there that we kind of, that I was very grateful for. You don't always get, particularly with TV, which moves so quickly, you don't always get rehearsal time, but just having that and being able to troubleshoot stuff was really great. But when we did finally get to set, it was just trusting in the other actors and trusting in the words and sort of getting on with it.
And it sounds like Rose gave you a lot of freedom in terms of the character development that you did with Tom, and even down to asking you about his name and wanting to have a name for him that spoke to you and who you saw him as a character. And so how did that transcend into other spaces where she gave you a lot of autonomy and a lot of input on him?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely true. I think it's a combination of Rose as an executive producer on the show has such a clear vision and a keen eye, and I think one of the most exciting things for people watching this is I think it has a lot of rewatch potential, because there's stuff that it's stuffed with gags, but even visually there's so many kind of references and homages, and Rose tweeted the other day about something, a reference in episode 4, and I kind of was like, I'm working with you every day and I didn't know that. So it's really and a lot of that stuff happens in the background that kind of when you're focusing on your own individual character, I'm not always aware of. But I think it was a combination of like having a fixed idea of the trajectory of these two people's relationship, but then within that, you know, there were. I have to be honest. Apart from what you just mentioned, I didn't have too many questions about or things that I needed to figure out or wanted to know more about with Tom, because he felt very three-dimensional on the page. Maybe just, you know, the odd thing with wardrobe where I'd be like, I want that because it's cool. But beyond that, yeah, he kind of felt very, very fully realized.
And with the fact that he is so fully realized, you know, throughout every single script, there's so many additional details that we're learning about his personality. And, you know, maybe it's a small detail like the fact that he loves pub quizzes. And so what's your process of really just going through the scripts and finding a lot of little referential details like that, which may just seem like a throwaway line, but actually tells you a lot about his personality? What does he love doing in his day to day as you're building out a lot of his backstory and a lot of that character development that goes on beyond the pages?
I think with that kind of stuff, I mean, it's weird the number of times, pub quizzes is a good example, the number of times I've read the script and something's been written in and I'm like, is someone watching me? Because I love it. It's one of the things I really miss about lockdown is not being able to go to a pub quiz. And that was, I'm pretty sure, not something that Rose knew about me before she wrote the part. So it's kind of, you know, this weird serendipity. But I think what all those details do is make this idea of a movie star a flesh and blood human being, and so part of the fun with Tom was playing someone who, you know, has achieved this huge like level of fame probably quite quickly, and in a way that, you know, my reading was he's not fully in control of, but he's along for the ride, and there's a lot on paper that he's got to be grateful for. But at the same time, with that, as you know, as with any profession, there are questions about is this the right thing that I'm doing? Particularly in this job, there is a question of like, how do I maintain any kind of life outside of that? And yeah, all of that was informed. You know, my personal experiences aren't the same as Tom's, but there are bits in that feel relatable, and also just looking at, you know, the experience of, you know, after 10 years in the industry of like, okay, I certainly know friends that have encountered that, and you know, I've seen how they grapple with that. So it's quite fun just talking to the director and figuring stuff out. There was a scene that was a lot of fun to play, which is Tom doing a press junket, and yeah, getting to misbehave during one of those, which I would never do in real life. But you know, the license to kind of act up was very fun.
But to that point exactly about the fact that, you know, he's along for the ride and he's obviously very excited by his success, but then he's also questioning what type of artist and creative that he wants to be. There's so many of those great juxtapositions in him as a character, because even the relationship with Jesse is, you know, I really like this person and I really want to pursue this, but should I pursue this? And there's certain flags that come up for him along the way. So there's a bit of a dance there as well of, I want this, but let me question things and make sure that I'm on the right path. And how do those sorts of juxtapositions really just give you a lot more to play with? Because then it gives you a lot more options in directions that you can take, even just individual minute details in a scene.
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think stories like this hinge on a couple of things. They hinge on the viewers really rooting for the two people at the center of them. And, you know, I had that reading the scripts. I was like, I want these crazy kids to work it out. And then I had to remind myself, oh yeah, I'm going to be playing one of them. But then also it's that thing of, it's a well-worn trope in the rom-com genre that there's got to be conflict. And I think the success or failure of a film or a series that within that genre is how fresh or believable those scenarios, you know, the kind of well-worn, oh, they should be together, but something comes up at the last minute, all that kind of stuff. And you know, it really felt like, yeah, it happens sometimes in quite heightened circumstances because of the different lives that these two people lead, but they felt very, very real. So the dilemmas felt in some way, hopefully, relatable even to someone who isn't in this business.
But it also feels very real between the two of them, down to the fact that, you know, when they have that argument, it's like they can say the things that annoy them as well as much as they can say the things that they really like. And so it doesn't feel like they're hiding who they are from each other. They're not putting on a version of themselves for the other. And so was it really important to the two of you to make sure that it was kind of setting something up that could be a really, really rich and complex and very real relationship between the two of them, rather than, you know, just, oh, this is the initial surface chemistry between the two of them right from the get-go?
Yeah, I think that was always there in the scripts, to be honest, that, you know, it was that, yeah, when as much as these two people are really attracted to each other, as is true of most relationships, there's going to be, I feel like, you know, we have a version of that just in the setup of being at home for a year, right? Like just like seeing the same people over and over again. Like there's certain things that you love about people can also rub you up the wrong way. And that felt important not to shy away from that. And yeah, sometimes that can be frustrating or ugly or painful. But I think that's true of human relationships. You know, we want this idealized version that it's always just going to be cute and romantic and you know, sort of just endless highs. But that's not the reality of it. And part of the scary thing, I think, is deciding whether you can let someone, yeah, see you at your worst, or how they might deal with a version of you that you can't put on all the time. And I think that's, you know, Tom is an extreme example of that. There's an element of him in his daily life that or his work life that he's used to kind of, you know, putting slick threads on and presenting himself. But then suddenly he's with someone who doesn't really seem to care about that a huge deal. And that's disarming and attractive, but then also means that they might see a bit more of him than he banked on.
It's also very clear that the chemistry was written into the scripts as well, but then obviously you have to take that and actualize it together on screen. And I always think it's so interesting to look at what is that initial spark, what is that initial kind of underlying chemistry, you know, and in this show, when you look at it, it's a conversation in the bathroom, but you get that connection, even though they're not actually saying anything specific to each other or telling themselves about each other. It's that kind of, we have the same sense of humor, and that's kind of what's pulling them together. Did the two of you talk about what you wanted that initial sparkle chemistry to be, or was that something that you really just felt out together through playing around with that scene?
I think it was, you know, it was there in the writing, and then it just became when we got to filming those scenes, it became about you know, just exploring the possibilities. You know, is it flirty here? Is it cheeky here? Is it, you know, how do these, because there's an element of sparring in their courtship, right? So what is the level that's pitched at, and where within that kind of sparring match, who gives ground when, that kind of thing. And sometimes those decisions were quite conscious. You know, it would be, you get a note from the director saying, maybe just try this way, so we have the options. But I've got to say, a lot of the time, it just it's part of the joy of acting in a show like this, which is so much about relationships, is you line up opposite your scene partner and you go off what they give you, and vice versa. So it becomes like a game of tennis. You know, you can't, I can't turn up to court and pre-plan the moves that I'm going to make, because as soon as Rose serves me something in a different way, I either have to adapt and go with it and keep the game alive, or try and force something of my own, and then it doesn't quite work.
Was that very similar as well when it came to working with the dialogue, in terms of a lot of the pacing and the rhythm, and what that tone was going to be with the comedy? Because again, it's on the page, but then you have to take it and figure out, you know, how you're going to play around with that language and how you want to deliver it. Was that very similar in terms of just kind of like the sparring partner with playing tennis?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it changes depending on who who you're, I say sparring. I don't mean I don't necessarily mean it's competition, because I don't think that's a very helpful way of looking at acting. It's a collaborative effort. But I suppose in scenes where there is this, there is this kind of flirtatious back and forth of some kind. Yeah, there is an element of like, well, the game, but then there's a different example of that would be in when I had scenes with Minnie Driver, who plays my agent Kath, who's a force of nature. I think it's the best way to describe her. And then it was just a case of, Minnie's so brilliant and at making the scene come alive, and there was we had a couple of takes where after director had got what she wanted, she said to Minnie, just have a play with this one, just riff, see what comes out. And that was really exciting, because then there's a case, as long as I'm not running this tennis analogy into the ground, then it's a case of just like, you're opposite Minnie Driver, she's improvising, just hold on to your racket and try and send everything back. And she's great, because she's such an experienced, she does a lot, my understanding is she does a lot of improv comedy back home in LA, and she's just got really great instincts. And so there was another example of, and I suppose the show is full of them. There are moments where, and it's the benefit of working with really skilled comedians. People just kind of riff, and we get to kind of play, and it's almost like playing in between the lines.
What was the history that you decided for yourself with Tom when it comes to Minnie being his agent? Kind of like, is she someone who's been working with him since the beginning of his career? Did they come together later on? Like, what's their level of intimacy? What's their, kind of friendship rapport? And obviously you get to see some of it, because he does have that thing of, saying, oh, I'm not going to follow that piece of advice, but also.
Yeah, it's a very particular relationship that I think it's a combination of these two have been together a while, and with that comes a certain closeness and a bond, but it also means that I think they're quite free with how they speak to each other, which you get from that scene, and there's an element of Kath being quite uncompromising in how she thinks Tom should make his decisions, and being quite forthright about what's sensible and what's not. But then there's also the other side of that is Tom, I think, is unafraid to tell Kath when he thinks she's being ridiculous. So it feels like a heightened, more extreme version of an agent-client relationship, but I'm definitely basing that on accounts I've heard from my friends in terms of how they deal with their, people that outside the context of this particular relationship, you'd hear that how they talk to each other, and you go, Jesus, that is not normal.
Oh, with Tom and Jesse, one of the things that's really wonderful between the two of them is the small details of thoughtfulness. When you think about the scene where he shows up to her house and he brings a box of cereal, because he's like, well, this is the only thing that I've seen you eat. It's actually more thoughtful than going up and picking up flowers, in a way, because it's like, no, I specifically, only you would appreciate this gift, and this is only for you. And that transcends into a lot of the smaller details throughout the show as well. And even if it's just the body language or the way that they are with each other in the room. So how did you determine what those really small details of thoughtfulness and connectivity were going to be, beyond things that were in the script, like the cereal?
I think the physical relationship that you talk about, that I think that comes from just logistically the time spent rehearsing and then blocking a scene, and we were always on the lookout for making choices that didn't feel, again, I go back to this idea that, okay, if it's about someone who's completely outside of the movie world, and a star coming together, there's there's kind of obvious hiccups within that dynamic that are fun to play with, but within that as well, there's still, grounding it in real human interaction, and whether that's something about, figuratively, Tom's shoulders dropping when he's not on for the camera, or letting his guard down, that kind of thing. But also there's still an awkwardness that comes with having a flutter in your stomach because you're excited to be with someone. And I think what was fun to play with Tom is, which feels very relatable, is that you can get good at the front. You can get good at being in work mode and presenting yourself in a certain way, but that doesn't mean underneath all of that there aren't still the same insecurities, anxieties, worries. Does this person like me? Am I coming across as a fool? All of that stuff in a way that is, I think, because of the often infantilizing process of being in this industry. And then certainly when you factor in like a high level of fame, which means that you stop, you're cut off from doing normal stuff. And you get so much given to you that I think, if anything, though, that space to go like, what am I doing, can really grow. So I think it was always using the script as a starting point, but then just trying to find out, it'll be questions like, okay, is this for both characters, is this a familiar space for them to be in? What does that feel like? And if it's unfamiliar for the other person, is one of you trying to make it okay for the other? Is one of you oblivious because you assume that they're going to be fine, and it only comes up as an issue later? So all of that was fed through as we were working.
And for the scene when they first get together at the beginning, the two of you had an intimacy coordinator working with you. And what's so brilliant about that moment in the show is the fact that it really leans into that comedy and that electricity coming from the humor again between the two of them. And so how did having an intimacy coordinator really help you in focusing on character choices and the comedy elements, having someone that could really think about the logistical elements, and were they also helping you in terms of how it came together character-wise as well?
I think it was so good to work with an intimacy coordinator, and I, it completely makes sense now that should be the industry standard. And I think there was, back in the day, there was this idea that you'd put actors together, maybe with a director, with a director, obviously, and then I don't know, it really depended on the skill set and the good judgment of the person holding that space. But it's terrifying because when you're called on to, usually with someone that you don't know very well, but whether you do or not is kind of irrelevant, to commit fully to simulating something that is very personal. It's, well, on a simple level, that's not easy. And then there's an extreme version of that, which is very important to acknowledge, which is sometimes that's not safe as well. And I think the way I've come to think of it with an intimacy coordinator is, if there was a fight scene in the script, you wouldn't get the two actors together and go, right, come on, then what have you got? Because someone's going to get hit, and it's the same. It's as soon as you're in the presence of someone that can help you work through that choreography, and also give notes and help input and make suggestions about what might work comedically. So, okay, have you thought about what it might look like in this position? This is a comedy sex scene, yeah, and it kind of demystifies for both parties, I think, questions that you might be afraid to ask, or how it's safe to do that in a way that still looks completely believable on camera. So it was a really positive experience, and I think it just makes that process one that you're not terrified of.
And you've mentioned the director on the show a couple of times, and so I wanted to talk about Karen May, who directed all.
Yeah.
So, what are the ways in which having her direct every single episode really evolved a lot of the character and narrative intimacy and connectivity through having someone on set with you every single day who just knows exactly what it is that you're bringing into these characters and knows exactly where you are in space and time throughout the whole process?
Well, it was so great having Karen across all 6 episodes because she's got a really strong sensibility and a really great eye. And I think her and Rose were kind of really complemented each other in that respect. And also her filmmaking background, as is so often the way with so much good TV now, there was always there was always a lookout to how to shoot something, or even in directing the acting, how to make this feel fresh and feel new. And I think it's a beautiful show to look at as well, Starstruck, and credit for that has to go to Karen and also to Will Hankey, our DP. And so you really felt like you were being taken through taken through a trajectory over 6 episodes, because the reality is we're filming this show 6 episodes in, I can't remember whether it's 7 or 8 weeks. It's a fast turnaround. There could be weeks where you're playing the character at multiple different times. By the end of the week, you're like, okay, we shot stuff from 4 different episodes this week. And obviously you're doing your due diligence on making sure that you know where the character is at any given time. But when a good director is also on the lookout to go, okay, but have you thought about the fact that we might revisit this beat further down the series, or depending on what the chronology is, like, don't forget you're going to play this, so let's just have a think about how that feels fresh and how it feels different, because you never want to get to something and be like, oh man, I've already played it this way, and Karen was really brilliant for that. And I mentioned the rehearsal period as well. That was really key. And I think just having a space where it was Karen, myself, Rose, and Will, our DP, and to figure out some of those scenes that we knew we probably weren't gonna get lots of time to shoot, but were really key scenes between those 2 characters. And knowing that, like, okay, on the day, actually, the camera's going to want to go there and probably going to want to move here. So we can think about, that, again, talking about choreography, like, what's that dance going to look like? So that on the day, you've already had a bit of a dress run and you're not trying to, we've already made some of the decisions when the clock's ticking.
And then lastly, I wanted to ask you about one of your other recent projects in doing Good Grief with Sean Clifford, because it was such an interesting hybrid project in having rehearsals over Zoom and then having it go out as a theatre project, but not necessarily on a stage, in more of a studio setting. And so what was something like the evolution of your craft that really occurred from having to work in such a hybrid format on that piece, and also with the intimacy of it being that 2-hander with her?
Yeah, it was a wonderful challenge, first and foremost, because we, I found out about the project. It was this wonderful 2-hander about Sean plays the best friend and I play the partner of a woman who's recently died of cancer. And it follows those 2 characters and their respective grieving process. And kind of how they negotiate that together when they've been brought together at the start of the play. It was a pandemic project, so we rehearsed for 2 weeks on Zoom, which involved myself, Sean, Natalie Abrahami, our director, and Lorien Haynes, the writer, just being on gallery view. Lots of just like rearranging the furniture to go, all right, well, this scene, this it's one of the magic things about theatre is the space can be anything. Right, so I'm going to pull some chairs in and we're going to recreate the car, and I'm going to sit here and I'm going to try and move the camera to, because we had to have an idea of what the cameras were going to be doing on the day, because it was shooting like a film. And yeah, so it's this amazing kind of game of 4D chess where you were not only trying to remember the lines and remember your intention and how to play to each other, but also think about where you were in space. And okay, so blocking wise, can I move here? oh no, you can't move there because now I'm standing on your head, so you've got to go over there. So that when we, you know, trying to just get that bedded in. And then when we shot it, we had 2 days in the studio, which is an incredibly short time to shoot a 40-page play slash film. It was, you know, very much felt like a hybrid form. But I think again, that's where you know, we were very clear that we weren't trying to not be theatrical in the way that we presented this. So that if there was, you know, if there were bits of set that clearly were meant to be something that they're not in real life, there wasn't that same concern about realism. You know, there are lovely moments where I think Sean had a bike helmet on in one scene, and I think there's a shot where you can see the camera reflected. Normally in TV, that would be a huge no-no. Someone would check the monitor afterwards and go, "We've got to go again." There's a reflection there. But it was quite freeing in this form to go, no, that's absolutely. We want the audience to know that they're in a way that they get to do when they come to see a play. They're suspending their disbelief. They're seeing the rough edges that normally you try and hide. And yeah, something about working in that way was terrifying, but also I think you know, led to something that I feel very proud of. And I think you know, even the subject matter it wasn't a COVID play by any means, but it's something about the examination of how people deal with grief. I think it's very relevant to the times we're in now, you know, where we're also cut off from each other, and people are grieving because of, you know, losing loved ones or feeling cut off from one another. So yeah, it was a really special thing to be a part of.
Well, it's so wonderful. And I'm so excited to hear that Starstruck is already deep into season 2. And thank you so much, Nikesh.
Thank you very much.